Gotcha. Yes. Get into it, lovelies. Get into it. Hold on one second, because I feel like my camera is smudged. I was right. Okay, now we're getting details. Sorry. I just woke up from after work nap. So we are all good. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, now we're good to go. Hi, y'all. Welcome back. As we get closer to Halloween night, last year I switched it up. I ended up reading The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, but I kind of want to go back to the tradition I've been doing for the last few years with story time, which is reading one of my favorite Halloween stories of all time, which is The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury. So I think I'm going to continue that trend. We'll probably start that on Hallows Eve on the 30th and then finish up on the 31st, the evening of the 31st. I will be passing out candy for trick-or-treats in Yellow Springs, so if you happen to be in the area and want to stop by, see me in costume, get some good candy, feel free to stop by. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. Hang in my glasses. Okay. Yes, now we're in full effect. And as I always say, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max, relax, and chillaxing time. In between time, mean time, scheme time, study time, break time, CP time, any time that you want to hear a highly animated voice bring you wonderful stories of magic, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, and many, many more in between. Phew. Gotcha. Chapter 6. Mr. Toad. It was a bright morning in the early part of summer. The river had resumed its wanton banks and its accustomed pace, and a hot sun seemed to be pulling everything green and bushy and spiky up out of the earth towards them. As if by strings, the mole and the water rat had been up since dawn, very busy on matters connected with boats and the opening of the boating season, painting and varnishing, mending paddles, repairing cushions, hunting for missing boat hooks, and so on, and were finishing breakfast in their little parlor and eagerly discussing their plans for the day, when a heavy knock sounded at the door. "Bother," said the rat, all over egg. "See who it is, Mole, like a good chap, and since you've finished." The mole went to attend the summons, and the rat heard him utter a cry of surprise. Then he flung the parlor door open and announced with much importance, "Mr. Badger." This was a wonderful thing indeed, that the Badger should pay a formal call on them, or indeed on anybody. Because as you remember, Badger is very introverted. He doesn't particularly like being amongst company unless he wants to do that. The Badger strode heavily into the room and stood looking at the two animals with an expression full of seriousness. The rat let his egg spoon fall on the tablecloth and sat open-mouthed. "The hour has come," said the Badger at last with great solemnity. "What hour?" asked the rat uneasily, glancing at the clock on the mantelpiece. "Whose hour, you rather should say," replied the Badger. "Why, Toad's hour, the hour of Toad. I said I would take him in hand as soon as the winter was over, and I'm going to take him in hand today." "Toad's hour, of course," cried the mole delightedly. "Hooray, I remember now. We'll teach him to be a sensible Toad." "This very morning," continued the Badger, taking an armchair, "as I learnt last night from a trustworthy source, another new and especially powerful motor car will arrive at Toad Hall on approval or return. At this very moment, perhaps Toad is busy arraying himself in those singularly hideous habiliments so dear to him, which transform him from a good-looking Toad into an object which throws any decent animal that comes across it into a violent fit. We must be up and doing ere it is too late. You two animals will accompany me instantly to Toad Hall, and the work of rescue shall be accomplished." "Right you are," cried the rat, starting up. "We'll rescue the poor unhappy animal. We'll convert him. He'll be the most converted Toad there ever was before we're done with him." They set up off the road on their mission of mercy. Badger leading the way, animals when in company walk in a proper and sensible manner, in single file instead of sprawling all across the road and being of no use or support to each other in case of sudden trouble or danger. They reached the carriage drive of Toad Hall to find, as the Badger had anticipated, a shiny new motor car of great size, painted a bright red, Toad's favorite color. Standing in front of the house, as they neared the door, it was flung open and Mr. Toad, arrayed in goggles, cap, gaiters, and enormous overcoat, came swaggering down the steps, drawing on his gauntleted gloves. "Hello, come on, you fellows," he cried cheerfully on catching sight of them. "You're just in time to come with me for a jolly. His hearty accents faltered and fell away as he noticed the stern, unbending look on the countenances of his silent friends, and his invitation remained unfinished. The Badger strode up the steps. "Take him inside," he said sternly to his companions. Then as Toad was hustled through the door, struggling and protesting, he turned to the chauffeur in charge of the new motor car. "I'm afraid you won't be wanted today," he said. "Mr. Toad has changed his mind. He will not require the car. Please understand that this is final. You needn't wait." Then he followed the others inside and shut the door. "Now then," he said to the Toad when the four of them stood together in the hall, "first of all, take those ridiculous things off." "Shan't," replied Toad with great spirit. "What is the meaning of this outrage? I demand an instant explanation." "Take them off him now. You too," ordered the Badger briefly. They had to lay Toad on the floor, kicking and calling all sorts of names, before they could get to work properly. Then the rats sat on him, and the mole got his motor clothes off of him bit by bit, and they stood him up on his legs again. A good deal of his blustering spirit seemed to have evaporated with the removal of his fine panoply. Now that he was merely Toad and no longer the terror of the highway, he giggled feebly and looked from one to the other appealingly, seeming quite to understand the situation. "You knew it was come to this sooner or later, Toad," the Badger explained severely. "You've disregarded all the warnings we've given you. You've gone on squandering the money your father left you, and you're getting us animals a bad name in the district by your furious driving and your smashes and your rows with the police. Independence is all very well, but we animals never allow our friends to make fools of themselves beyond a certain limit, and that limit you've reached. Now you're a good fellow in many respects, and I don't want to be too hard on you. I'll make one more effort to bring you to reason. You will come with me into the smoking room, and there you will hear some facts about yourself, and we'll see whether you come out of that room the same Toad that you went in." He took Toad firmly by the arm, led him into the smoking room, and closed the door behind him. "That's not good," said the rat contemptuously. "Talking to Toad will never cure him. He'll say anything." They made themselves comfortable in armchairs and waited patiently. Through the closed door they could just hear the long, continuous drone of the Badger's voice rising and falling in waves of oratory, and presently they noticed that the sermon began to be punctuated at intervals by long-drawn sobs, evidently proceeding from the bosom of Toad, who was a soft-hearted and affectionate fellow, very easily converted, for the time being, to any point of view. After some 3/4 of an hour, the door opened and the Badger reappeared, solemnly leading by the paw a very limp and dejected Toad. His skin hung baggedly about him, his legs wobbled, his cheeks were furrowed by the tears so plentifully called forth by the Badger's moving discourse. "Sit down there, Toad," said the Badger kindly, pointing to a chair. "My friends," he went on, "I am pleased to inform you that Toad has at last seen the error of his ways, and he has undertaken to give up motor cars entirely and forever. I have his solemn promise to that effect." "That is very good news," said the Mole gravely. "Very good news indeed," observed the Rat dubiously. If only, he was looking very hard at Toad as he said this. I could not help thinking he perceived something vaguely resembling a twinkle in the animal's still sorrowful eye. "There's only one thing more to be done," continued the gratified Badger. "Toad, I want you to solemnly to repeat before your friends here what you fully admitted to me in the smoking room just now. First, you are sorry for what you've done, and you see the folly of it all." There was a long pause. Toad looked desperately this way and that while the other animals waited in grave silence. At last he spoke. "No," he said a little sullenly but stoutly. "I am not sorry. And it wasn't folly at all. It was simply glorious." "What?" cried the Badger, greatly scandalized. "You backsliding animal. Didn't you tell me just now in there?" "Oh, yes, in there," said Toad impatiently. "I'd have said anything in there. You're so eloquent, dear Badger, and so moving, and so convincing. And you'll put all your points so frightfully well. You can do what you like with me in there, you know. But I've been searching my mind since, and going over things in it, and I find that I'm not a bit sorry, or repentant really, so it's not earthly good saying I am. Now is it?" "Then you don't promise," said the Badger, "never to touch a motor car again?" "Certainly not," replied Toad empathetically. "Oh, the contrary. I faithfully promise that the very first motor car I see, poop, poop, off I go for it." "Told you so, didn't I?" observed the Rat to the Mole. "Very well, then," said the Badger firmly, rising to his feet. "Since you won't yield to persuasion, we'll try what force can do. I feared it would come to this all along. You've often asked us three to come and stay with you, Toad, in this handsome house of yours. Well, now we're going to. When we've converted you to a point of view, we may quit, but not before. Take him upstairs, you two, and lock him up in his bedroom while we arrange matters between ourselves." "It's for your own good, Toady, you know," said the Rat kindly as Toad, kicking and struggling, was hauled up the stairs by his two faithful friends. "Think what fun we shall have together, just as we used to when you've quite got over this painful attack of yours." "We'll take great care of everything for you till you're well, Toad," said the Mole, "and we'll see your money isn't wasted as it has been." "No more of those regrettable incidences with the police, Toad," said the Rat as they thrust him into his bedroom. "And no more weeks in the hospital being ordered about by female nurses, Toad," added the Mole, turning the key on him. They descended the stair, Toad shouting abuse at them through the keyhole, and the three friends then met in conference on the situation. He is upset. But honestly, children, that's what a real friend does. That's what's so awesome about this story, is that it exemplifies the true essence, to me at least, of friendship. And that when your friend or somebody you care about or love is doing something that is not in their best interest, you should step up. You should say something. You should call it out for what it is, respectfully. And if force is necessary, do so kindly. Not to hurt them, but to at least shake them into some, reason and some decency, and to remind them of who they really are instead of the poor choices that they're making, if that makes sense. Always be a good friend to call out poor behavior. Do not celebrate poor behavior. It's not good. "It's going to be a tedious business," said the Badger, sighing. "I've never seen Toad so determined. However, we will see it out. We must never be left an instant unguarded. We shall have to take it in turns to be with him till the poison has worked itself out of his system." They arranged watches accordingly. Each animal took it in turns to sleep in Toad's room at night, and they divided the day up between them. At first, Toad was undoubtedly very trying to his careful guardians. When his violent paroxysms possessed him, he would arrange bedroom chairs in rude resemblance of a motor car, and would crouch on the foremost of them, bent forward and staring fixedly ahead, making uncouth and ghastly noises, till the climax was reached. When turning a complete somersault, he would lie prostrate amidst the ruins of the chairs, apparently completely satisfied for the moment. As time passed, however, these painful seizures grew gradually less frequent, and his friends strove to divert his mind into fresh channels. But his interest in other matters did not seem to revive, and he grew apparently languid and depressed. One fine morning, the Rat, whose turn it was to go on duty, went upstairs to relieve Badger, whom he'd found fidgeting to be off and stretch his legs in a long ramble round his wood and down his earthsome burrows. "Toad's still in bed," he told the Rat outside the door. "Can't get much out of him, except, leave me alone. He wants nothing. Perhaps he'll be better presently. It may pass off in time. Don't be unduly anxious," and so on. "Now you look out, Rat. When Toad's quiet and submissive and playing at being the hero of a Sunday school prize, then he's at his artfulest. That's sure to be something up. I know him. Well, now, I must be off." "How are you today, old chap?" inquired the Rat cheerfully as he approached Toad's bedside. He had to wait some minutes for an answer. At last a feeble voice replied, "Thank you so much, dear Ratty. So good of you to inquire. But first tell me, how are you yourself and the excellent Mole?" "Oh, we're all right," replied the Rat. "Mole," he added incautiously, "is going out for a run round with Badger. They'll be out till luncheon time, so you and I will spend a pleasant morning together, and I'll do my best to amuse you. Now jump up, there's a good fellow, and don't lie moping there on a fine morning like this." "Dear kind Rat," murmured Toad. "How little you realize my condition, and how far I am from jumping up, now, if ever. But do not trouble about me. I hate being a burden to my friends, and I do not expect to be much longer. Indeed, I almost hope not." "Well, I hope not too," said the rat heartily. "You've been a fine bother to us all this time, and I'm glad to hear it's going to stop. And in weather like this and the boating season just beginning, it's too bad of you, Toad. It isn't the trouble we mind, but you're making us miss such an awful lot." "I'm afraid it is the trouble you mind, though," replied the Toad languidly. "I can quite understand it. It's natural enough. You're tired of bothering about me. I mustn't ask you to do anything further. I'm a nuisance, I know." "You are indeed," said the rat, "but I tell you, I'd take any trouble on earth for you, if only you'd be a sensible animal." "If I thought that, Ratty," "Excuse me," murmured Toad more feebly than ever, "then I would beg you for the last time, probably, to step round to the village as quickly as possible. Even now it may be too late, and fetch the doctor. But don't you bother. It's only a trouble, and perhaps we may as well let things take their course." "Why? What do you want a doctor for?" inquired the rat, coming closer and examining him. He certainly lay very still and flat, and his voice was weaker and his manner much changed. "Surely you've noticed of late," murmured Toad, "but no, why should you? Noticing things is only a trouble. Tomorrow, indeed, you may be saying to yourself, 'Oh, if only I had noticed sooner, if only I'd done something.' But no, it's trouble. Never mind, forget that I asked." "Look here, old man," said the rat, beginning to get rather alarmed. "Of course I'll go fetch a doctor for you, if you really think you want him, but you can hardly be bad enough for that yet. Let's talk about something else." "I fear, dear friend," said Toad with a sad smile, "that talk can do a little in a case like this, or doctors either. For that matter, still one must grasp at the slightest straw, and by the way, while you're about it, I hate to give you additional trouble, but I happen to remember that you will pass the door. Would you mind at the same time asking the lawyer to step up? It would be a convenience to me, and there are moments, perhaps I should say there is a moment, when one must face disagreeable tasks, and whatever costs to exhausted nature. A lawyer? Oh, he must be really bad," the affrighted rat said to himself as he hurried from the room, not forgetting, however, to lock the door carefully behind him. Outside, he stopped to consider. The other two were far away, and he had no one to consult. "It's best to be on the safe side," he said, on reflection. "I've known Toad fancy himself frightfully bad before, without the slightest reason, but I've never heard him ask for a lawyer. There's nothing really the matter, the doctor will tell him. He's an old fool, and cheer him up, and that will be something gained. I'd better humor him and go. It won't take very long." So he ran off to the village and on his errand of mercy. The Toad, who had hopped lightly out of bed as soon as he heard the key turned in the lock, watched him eagerly from the window till he disappeared down the carriage drive, then laughed heartily. He dressed as quickly as possible in the smartest suit he could lay hands on at the moment, filled his pockets with cash, which he took from a small drawer in the dressing table, and next, knotting the sheets from his bed together and tying one end of the improvised rope around the central mullion of the handsome Tudor window, which formed such a feature on his bedroom, he scrambled out, slid lightly to the ground, and taking the opposite direction to the rat, marched off lightheartedly, whistling a merry tune. It was a gloomy luncheon for Rat when the Badger and the Mole at length returned, and he had to face them at the table with his pitiful and unconvincing story. The Badger's caustic, not to say brutal remarks may be imagined, and therefore passed over. But it was painful to the Rat that even the Mole, though he took his friend's side as far as possible, could not help saying, "You've been a bit of a duffer this time, Ratty. Toad, too, of all animals." "He did it awfully well," said the crestfallen Rat.
"He did you awfully well," rejoined the Badger haughtily. "However, talking won't mend matters. He's got clear away for the time, that's certain, and the worst of it is, he'll be so conceited with what he'll think his cleverness that he may commit any folly. One comfort is, we're free now and needn't waste any more of our precious time doing sentry go. Would we better continue to sleep at Toad Hall for a while longer? Toad may be brought back at any moment, on a stretcher or between two policemen."
So spoke the Badger, not knowing what the future held in store, or how much water, and of how turbid a character was to run under bridges before Toad could sit at ease again in his ancestral hall. Meanwhile, Toad, gay and irresponsible, was walking briskly along the high road some miles from home. At first he had taken bypaths and crossed many fields and changed his course several times in case of pursuit. But now, feeling by this time safe from recapture and the sun smiling brightly on him and all nature joining in a chorus of approval to the song of self-praise that his own heart was singing to him, he almost danced along the road in satisfaction and conceit.
Smart piece of work, that, he remarked to himself, chuckling. Brain against brute force, and brain came out on top, as it's bound to do. Poor old Ratty. My, won't he catch it when the badger gets back? A worthy fellow, Ratty, with many good qualities, but very little intelligence and absolutely no education. I must take him in hand some day and see if I can make something out of him. Full of conceited thoughts such as those, he strode along, his head in the air, till he reached a little town where the sign of the Red Lion swinging across the road halfway down the main street reminded him that he had not breakfasted that day and that he was exceedingly hungry after his long walk. He marched into the inn and ordered the best lunch that could be provided at so short a notice and sat down to eat it in the coffee room. There he is. He was about halfway through his meal when an only too familiar sound approaching down the street made him start and fall to trembling all over. The poop-poop drew nearer and nearer. The car could be heard to turn into the inn yard and come to a stop. So the inn is where he's at, and there's a yard where cars and carriages can park. And Toad had to hold on to the leg of the table to conceal his overmastering emotion. Presently, the party entered the coffee room, hungry, talkative, and happy, voluble on the experiences of the morning and the merits of the chariot that had brought them along so well. Toad listened eagerly, all ears for a time. At last he could stand it no longer. He slipped out of the room quietly, paid his bill at the bar, and soon as he got outside, sauntered around quietly to the inn yard. There cannot be any harm, he said to himself, in my only just looking at it. The car stood in the middle of the yard, quite unattended, and the stable helps and other hangers-on being all at their dinner. Toad walked slowly round it, inspecting, criticizing, musing deeply. I wonder, he said to himself presently, I wonder if this sort of car starts easily. Next moment, hardly knowing how it came about, he found he had hold of the handle and was turning it. As the familiar sound broke forth, the old passion seized on Toad and completely mastered him, body and soul. As if in a dream, he found himself somehow seated in the driver's seat, as if in a dream, he pulled the lever and swung the car round the yard and out into the archway, and as if in a dream, all sense of right and wrong, all fear of obvious consequences seemed temporarily suspended. He increased his pace, and as the car devoured the street and leapt forth on the high road through the open country, he was only conscious that he was Toad once more, Toad at his best and highest, Toad the terror, the traffic queller, the lord of the lone trail, before whom all must give way or be smitten into nothingness and everlasting night. He chanted as he flew, and the car responded with sonorous drone. The miles were eaten up under him as he sped, he knew not whither, fulfilling his instincts, living his hour, reckless of what might come to him. He has a new mania. Motor mania. To my mind, observed the chairman of the bench of magistrates cheerfully. A magistrate is basically a fancy way of saying a judge of a district or a region. The only difficulty that presents itself in this otherwise very clear case on how we can possibly make it sufficiently hot for the incorrigible rogue and hardened ruffian whom we see cowering in the dock before us. Let me see. He has been found guilty on the clearest evidence. First, of stealing a valuable motor car. Secondly, of driving to the public danger. And thirdly, of gross impertinence to the rural police. Mr. Clark, will you tell us, please, what is the very stiffest penalty we can impose for each of these offenses? Without, of course, giving the prisoner the benefit of any doubt, because there isn't any. The clerk
scratched his nose with his pen. Some people would consider, he observed, that stealing the motor car was the worst offence, and so it is. But checking the police undoubtedly carries the severest penalty, and so it ought. Supposing you were to say 12 months for the theft, which is mild, and 3 years for the furious driving, which is lenient, and 15 years for the cheek, which was pretty bad sort of cheek. Judging by what we've heard from the witness box, even if you only believe 1/10 part of what you heard, and I never believe more myself, those figures, if added together correctly, total up to 19 years. First rate, said the chairman. So you had better make it round 20 years and be on the safe side, concluded the clerk. An excellent suggestion, said the chairman approvingly. Prisoner, pull yourself together and try and stand up straight. It's going to be 20 years for you this time. And mind if you appear before us again upon any charge whatever, we shall have to deal with you very seriously. Then the brutal minions of the law fell upon the hapless Toad, loaded up with chains, and dragged him from the courthouse, shrieking, praying, protesting across the marketplace. Where the playful populace, always as severe upon detected crime as they are sympathetic and helpful when one is merely wanted, assailed him with jeers and carrots and popular catchwords, past hooting school children, their innocent faces lit up with the pleasure they ever derive from the sight of a gentleman in difficulties, across the hollow-sounding drawbridge, below the spiky portcullises, under the frowning archway of the grim old castle whose ancient towers soared high overhead, past guard-rooms full of grinning soldiery of off-duty, past sentries who cough in a horrid, sarcastic way, because that is as much as sentry on his post dare to show his contempt and abhorrence of crime, up time-worn winding stairs, past men-at-arms in casket and corselet of steel, darting threatening looks through their visors, across courtyards where mastiffs strain at their leash and paw the air to get at him, past ancient warders, their halberts leaned against the wall, dozing over a pasty and flagon of brown ale, on and on, past the rack chamber and the thumbscrew room, past the turning that led to the private scaffold, till they reached the door of the grimmest dungeon that lay in the heart of the innermost keep. There at last they paused, where an ancient goiler sat fingering a bunch of mighty keys. "Obbs Bodkins," said the sergeant of police, taking off his helmet and wiping his forehead. "Rouse thee, old loon, and take over this vile Toad, a criminal of deepest guilt and matchless artfulness and resource. Watch and ward him with all thy skill, and mark thee well, greybeard, should aught untoward befall. Thy old head shall answer for this, and a murrain on both of them." The goiler nodded grimly, laying his withered hand on the shoulder of the miserable Toad. The rusty key creaked in the lock, the great door clanged behind them, and Toad was a helpless prisoner in the remotest dungeon of the best guarded keep of the stoutest castle in all the length and breadth of merry England. And that is where we will end for today. This is why it pays to not do mischief, because you will get in trouble with the law. And our friend Toad, unfortunately, has gotten caught up in his own mania. We're going to see what happens next time we meet. Bye, y'all. Have a good night.